In 1985, a woman woke up to a man standing at the foot of her bed at roughly 2 a.m. Before the woman could say anything, the man pulled out a weapon and attacked her husband. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a set of handcuffs before demanding the woman to put them on. He said, "Swear on Satan that you are not going to scream, otherwise I'll hurt your sons." Since he was armed, the woman had no choice but to comply. It seemed like he had done this before and followed an exact set of steps, although at this point the woman was still unaware of the motive behind the attack. The intruder asked where he could find all their money and valuables, and yet again asked to swear it on Satan. The man then dragged her into the guest room and assaulted her multiple times until one of her sons walked in. The intruder tied him up and kept going. Afterward, the man left for the kitchen to have some of their leftovers. He then finally left the home. This was one attack of several, and the police soon gave him the moniker of the Night Stalker. The man, Richard Ramirez, was later arrested and sent to prison.
This story has haunted me for days because it sounds like something that could happen to anyone. A young family living in a quiet, picture-perfect neighborhood, the kind where everyone smiles and waves at each other. They hired this nanny to help with their kids. Her name is Polly Murphy, and at first, she's perfect. Calm, polite, and almost too good to be true. Her background checks out, every reference is glowing, and everyone who's ever hired her swears she's amazing. But soon, things start to feel wrong. The mom begins noticing Polly's strange habits, like how she stares at her husband just a little too long, or how she's been wearing her clothes and mimicking her voice, even her mannerisms, which is so incredibly creepy. And when the mom confronted her, Polly just stared, silent and expressionless. It's clear that something deep inside of her has broken, but no one believed the mom. Not until things escalated into something violent and unthinkable. But thankfully, this isn't a real case. It's The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Hulu's terrifying new remake of the 1992 psychological thriller. It's starring Mary Elizabeth Winstead, the original Scream Queen, and Micah Monroe, best known for It Follows and Longlegs. Two absolute masterpieces, in my opinion. The acting is deeply unsettling, and the story is seductive and psychologically unhinged. This movie will make you question your own two eyes, which is my favorite type of movie. I love feeling like I never know what's going to happen or who's telling the truth. If you want to find out what's really going on in this house and what Polly is truly hiding, watch The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, streaming now on Hulu.
And this is why you don't stop looking for missing people, because sometimes, far and few between, but sometimes even after years have passed, you do find them. That little girl never made it to school that morning. She was taken in broad daylight, and for the next 8 years, she would be kept hidden in an underground cellar that was built just for her. In 1998, 10-year-old Natasha Kambusch was living in Vienna, Austria. She was the youngest of 3 children and came from what most described as a normal but somewhat turbulent home. Her parents had recently separated, so there was a bit of family tension there, on top of the tension that was already felt because her mom was quite strict and she had a lot of high expectations. Natasha was living with her mother at the time of her abduction, and even though her mother has always said that she had a lot of love for her daughter, the environment that Natasha grew up in and the way that she was treated, it was not good for her mental health. But despite everything as a kid, she's been described to have been bright, kind, and independent. The morning of March 2nd in 1998 was a Monday. That morning, Natasha left her home and started her walk to school. And like I said, her mother was pretty strict. She never allowed Natasha to go anywhere by herself, let alone walk anywhere alone. But because Natasha was raised to be really independent, she wanted to be able to go to places by herself, and it took some convincing, but eventually her mom finally agreed to start letting her walk to school instead of driving her and dropping her off. That Monday was the very first day that she was allowed to walk to school by herself, but she left her house, disappeared, and no one would be able to find her for the next 8 years. When Natasha failed to show up back home at the time that she was supposed to, her mom called the school only to find out that she had never made it to school that day. Authorities were called and almost immediately a search ensued for her. Officers searched through the path that she would have taken from her house to the school. Neighbors were questioned. Fields were searched. They were looking through signs of where she could be, but also signs of anything that would show them what may have distracted her or stopped her from making it all the way to school. And then a 12-year-old little girl comes forward, a different little girl who had seen something that she knew was important. On her walk to school, she had seen Natasha. I don't know if she necessarily knew that it was Natasha, but she saw another little girl. And she told investigators that she saw that little girl being pushed into a white van by a man, confirming their worst fears. 10-year-old Natasha had been abducted in broad daylight. So now it was, find anyone who may drive a white van or anyone who may be connected to someone who drives a white van and question them. And they did. Authorities questioned over 1,000 different people with white vans, and they talked to all of them, yet days turned into weeks, that turned into months, that turned into years, with no sign of Natasha. So where was she? Well, when she had been around halfway into her walk to school, she had noticed a man standing awkwardly outside his open white delivery van near the sidewalk. Within seconds of walking past him, he had grabbed her, overpowered her, and threw her into the back of his van, closing the door shut and speeding off in the direction of his own home. The man responsible was 35-year-old Wolfgang. Is that like a common name? 35-year-old Wolfgang Pricklepill. He was a communications technician who had been stalking that area for days looking for his perfect victim. He drove Natasha to his home in a suburb called Strasshof. When they got there, he wrapped her up in a blue blanket and carried her inside into this tiny little cellar room that he had previously been preparing to keep his victim in. I think I may have mispronounced his name. I think his last name is pronounced Prickloppel, but Prickloppel referred to that room as his dungeon, and it was through a small trapdoor in the garage, down some stairs, so underground, through a hollowed out concrete wall that was on the other side of a small metal hatch, and that was all hidden behind a cabinet. The cellar itself was also soundproof, so it was like underground in a room within a room. It was so hidden and well secure that it took them almost an hour to get inside. But when they did, they walked into the room that Prickloppel had prepared. And you know what is so scary to think about? If something had happened to Prickloppel, if he passed away or decided to move away, Natasha would stay in that room completely alone, trapped. She probably would have passed away from lack of food or water before anyone found her, if they even found her at all, because that room she was kept in was so small and it was so well hidden. It was 5 by 5 meters, soundproofed and windowless, cluttered with a bed, a toilet, what was supposed to be a small tiny little desk I guess, and a small makeshift plastic ventilator fan. That fan was just barely enough to keep some sort of air circulation in the room, and it also made the most annoying rattling sound 24/7. Add to that the fact that the lights were almost always, in the beginning, were almost always on 24/7. I mean, those two things alone with nothing else to distract you would be enough to drive someone to insanity. And Prickloppel, by the way, he wasn't a smart guy, okay? I think a lot of his brain power went unused, but he did have experience in construction, which is what he put to use when he was building this underground cellar. Once they were inside, he took her shoes and her backpack. When she pleaded with him to be able to keep her backpack, Pricklepill responded by saying that she couldn't keep it because she could have a hidden transmitter in her backpack that she would be planning on using to be able to call for help, which doesn't really make sense, but he doesn't really make sense. Natasha then asked him if he was going to SA her, to which he responded by saying, "No, you are too young for that." For her first 4 years in that cellar, Pricklepill mistreated her in such a sick way psychologically, but he never touched her. And even though Natasha was only 10 years old, she had watched TV, she had seen things on the news, she knew why men like Pricklepill stole little girls, and she knew what they did to the little girls once they took them, so she was mentally preparing herself for the worst, and she was caught completely off guard when, instead of what she was expecting, he turned to her and asked her if there was anything he could get her to make her feel more comfortable. He went out and got her a new mattress, a toothbrush, a hairbrush, books, toys, cookies, and as days passed and then weeks passed, they fell into this routine in which Pricklepill would come down, bring her food, bring her more cookies, bring her dessert, more books, more toys, different snacks, even hot plates that she could have for dinner. And over time, the quote-unquote presents that he would bring down for her became very random, being things such as mouthwash and tape, but still, he would give her the things that she would ask for. So it was so confusing, so scary, but also so weird, because the fact of the matter was that he abducted her in broad daylight, basically stole her away from all her family and friends, and took everything away that made her her, holding her and hiding her out from the outside world. Yet he acted like he was almost being nice to her, reading her bedtime stories, feeding her, helping her paint, homeschooling her, teaching her math and English to make up for everything that she was missing out on in school. But then at times he would snap and his behavior would change, and he would yell at her, and he would withhold food and water for days and tell her about this group of men that would come and get her and take her away forever if she didn't listen to everything that he told her to do. He also often told her that he was an Egyptian god and that things would just be easier for the both of them if she just listened to him. Yeah, okay. It's so psychologically twisted and such weird behavior. The way that Natasha learned how to deal with it as a survival tactic was to put herself in the mind of a toddler almost, pretending that she was a younger child who did need help, or just imagining things that were not real just to keep her sanity. For example, when he would bathe her, she would pretend that she was at a spa. When he would spoon feed her instead of letting her feed herself, she would think that maybe she did need the help. When he would read her bedtime stories, she would imagine herself as a little girl whose dad was reading stories for her. When he would bring her gifts, she would think of him as a gentleman, convincing herself that everything he was doing to her because he was kind. And for Natasha, again, keep in mind she was only 10 years old when she was taken, but this new reality of hers was even more confusing, not only because of how hot and cold Pricklepill was towards her and because of how quote-unquote nice he was in the beginning, but also because the only thing that she could compare this new life to was to her old life. And remember, I told you back at home before she was abducted, she was struggling with her mental health because of her mother. Natasha was a loved child, by the way. Her parents did love her, but her mom was really hard on her. She's described her to have been a quote brutal mom, and she's also said that she had a hard time dealing with her parents' divorce that left her feeling kind of lonely and empty. So she went from feeling like her mom never really paid her attention to now living with this guy whose sole purpose was to shower her with gifts and visit her and bring her food and give her attention. But she also knew that at the end of the day, he was her abductor. So everything felt very confusing, and you can understand as to why, to a little girl, all of that combined would have affected the perception that Natasha had of the role that Priklopil played in her life. And like a lot of perpetrators in cases such as this one, the most important thing to Priklopil was remaining in control. Whatever he said, Natasha did. And because she would go along with it, over time Priklopil started to trust her more and more, and eventually he started to let her come out of the cellar and into the actual house. There were still rules to follow, don't get me wrong. Every single window, shade, and curtain was always closed. Every single door was always locked when Natasha was allowed to come upstairs. She also had to have a plastic bag over her head to make sure that none of her hair fell out and onto the floor to further minimize the chances of there being any trace of her inside of the house. She also wasn't allowed to touch anything because her fingerprints could not be on anything. But he would let her come upstairs at times, and eventually he started to take her out of the house to run errands with him or just to get out and spend some time outside together. He once took her skiing for the day. I think in total he took her out of the house a total of 13 times, but by that point Natasha had been so brainwashed and trained to fear Priklopil that she wouldn't even consider trying to ask for help. First of all, because he was always right next to her, never losing sight of her, but also because of things that he would tell her that would happen to her if she did try to escape or tell someone that she needed help. So anytime they would be outside, Natasha would just keep her held down and do everything in her power to draw the least amount of attention towards her. Not to mention, years had passed, Natasha had grown up. She no longer looked like the little girl that was on the missing persons poster. So even if and when people saw her, they would report sightings of her to authorities. There was no way of saying for sure that that was her, that the person that they saw was Natasha, because no one apart from her abductor knew what she looked like anymore. So they would go out, they would come back home, Natasha would go right back into her cellar, locked away in that tiny little room away from the world. As Priklopil began trusting Natasha more and more throughout the years, those small moments of freedom that he allowed her came with an even darker cost, because by the time that she was in her teenage years, the things that he would do to her and demanded of her had turned physical, all while the psychological part of it was also getting worse. Priklopil would intentionally physically hurt her. He would deny her food and water for days at a time. He started bringing her upstairs to clean his house and do chores. He would remind her all the time that she was only allowed to speak when spoken to. He ended up installing an intercom in the cellar that he would use to yell insults at her from his bedroom upstairs all throughout the night to keep her awake. And even though Natasha has never gone into detail about the SA, she said this in a book that she later wrote called 3096 Days in Captivity. It reads, quote, "It wasn't about he wanted to cuddle. I was something to hold tight to in the night," end quote. So he was awful when he wanted to be so and when he wanted to be in a bad mood, yet he would still experience his quote-unquote good moods. And when he was in a good mood, he would talk to Natasha about what it would look like for them to build what he called a normal life together. He would talk about them being a family together. He would bring up the idea of giving her fake documents to give her a different identity so they could live their happily ever after. He really truly thought that the possibility of them becoming a family together was a real one. This is a quote from Natasha when talking about this, quote, "I think he really trusted me. He was able to communicate with me to act out his illness. I think he wanted to create his own little perfect world with a person who could be there just for him," end quote. But no matter how much he tried to blur the lines, Natasha knew exactly what she was, a victim trying to survive. And early on, she made a promise to herself, telling herself that even though she was too young now, when she turned 18, she would find enough confidence and strength and power within herself to escape. She told herself that now all she had to do was survive, take it day by day, doing what she was told, until one day she would be able to gather up the courage to leave. Back at home, Natasha's mom did everything she could to hold on to hope, even though investigators told her to start looking for a grave for Natasha, making it sound like there was no possibility that they would be able to find her alive now. But her mom continued to bake her cakes for her birthday every year, trying to hold on to the idea that her daughter would one day come home. And it makes me so happy to say that one day she would. Natasha Kampusch turned 18 years old, and she told herself that it was now or never. She could not deal with Priklopil anymore. She had had enough. She could tell that he was mentally ill and that his illness was only getting worse. It was too much. And in her book, she wrote, quote, "He became more and more erratic and uncontrolled. His outbursts of rage became more frequent. He naturally blamed me and fell into an utterly paranoid, delusional state," end quote. So after her 18th birthday, she started coming up with a plan on how she was going to be able to escape. And one day on August 23rd of 2006, when they were both in the garden, Natasha was vacuuming his car and Priklopil was watching her. And then he got a phone call, and because of the vacuum, he couldn't hear it well. So he stepped out of the room, which is when Natasha noticed that the gate leading to the street was unlocked. And she opened it and she ran. I have goosebumps. With everything in her, she started running frantically, tears streaming down her face, trying to flag down any strangers to be able to beg them to call the police. The police was called and Natasha told them everything. She told them about the room that she had been kept in for the last 8 years. She told them about the house. She was able to give them the exact address. She told them about Prickle Pill, and she took the first breath of fresh air, finally relaxed, finally feeling like she was safe for the first time in years. And as you can imagine, authorities were absolutely shocked. They rushed over to Prokopil's house. They didn't find him, but they found the room exactly where Natasha said that it would be, confirming that everything she had told, her entire story, was more than true. Within minutes of her escape, Prokopil had noticed that she was gone, and he decided to go to the nearest train tracks and lie down on them until a train ran completely over his head, ending his life. Natasha's story broke in the media, and it was everything that everyone was talking about. And while you had the people that were so supportive, so over the moon, not only for Natasha, but also for her family, and looked at her as brave and strong and held a lot of respect for her, you also had the nasty side of the media of people that were saying, oh, because she was there for 8 years, she must have liked being a victim. She must have enjoyed it because she did not run away sooner. And because there were things that Natasha did not want to go into detail about, such as the details of her essay, understandably so, because why would you want to tell the entire world about the worst thing that you've ever been through? But because of that, the nasty side of the media started saying, oh, she must have not had it that bad, completely twisting the narrative of her own story. It's gross. It's insane. Seriously. And people began writing letters to Natasha, grown men writing these letters, trying to bribe her to come and live with them. It's so disturbing that with such a heroic story, a survival story, you still have the disgusting people choosing to see the situation in the sick ways that they want to. One of the letters she received read, quote, "You could come live with me and help me with the housework. I'm offering board, wages, and lodging. Although I'm married, I'm sure we will find an agreement," end quote. Like, what do you actually mean? Because how do you look at her story and think, how can I make this about myself? How can I make her my victim because her abductor is now gone? It's beyond me. After her escape, when she was asked about how she felt that so many people now knew her name and her face and recognized her, she said that she found it bothersome and disturbing, saying, quote, "I knew when I was in the dungeon that the story would make me famous, but I thought it would be more of a positive experience, like winning the Olympics. You're in the media once, people admire you, and then it's over and done with. I never thought I'd meet so many unpleasantly curious people who refuse to keep their distance from me, who are uneducated. I have many personal complexes as well, so being such a well-recognized figure just adds to that," end quote. Today, Natasha, I believe, is still living in Austria. She actually ended up buying the house that she was once held captive in. She decided to purchase it after her escape, which I know hearing that would make a lot of people feel weird, but she bought it to make sure that it did not become some sort of shrine of sorts or like a museum that people could go to and look at the cellar and the dungeon. She bought the house because she did not want someone else to buy it and then sensationalize her story in the way that they wanted to. But I don't think she lives in the house. I think it's like a second house. Maybe she lives there sometimes, but I don't think that's like her primary house. She has worked as an author and public figure, speaking out about her personal experiences and what recovery looks like for her, and she has said that she is no longer willing to be defined by what happened to her, but rather how she chose to survive. Yeah, I have so much respect for her because what an incredible story. I mean, obviously horrific, but you know what I'm trying to say. But that is all for me today. Thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to Natasha's story. I also wanted to say at the end of this video that obviously we know that there are a lot of horrible people in the world. Trust me, I'm the first one to say that the world is a really scary place. I'm kind of scared of everything. But I always see in my comment section people talking about how scary the world is and how bad it is nowadays. Just wanted this to be a reminder that, like, trust me, I know, but also there are so many good people in the world. And we talk about these stories to bring awareness so that the good people like me and you can stay away from the scary bad people. But important to know and not to forget that there are a lot of good people in the world, nice people, kind people with big hearts, happy people. There is just as much beauty in the world as there is darkness. So it's important to pay attention to the good and keep that in mind, or else we would all go insane. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
There's something about this time of year when it starts getting dark before 5 p.m. that just feels off. The whole world gets quiet in this eerie, heavy way. And that's usually when my brain starts to obsess over the creepiest stuff possible. So I normally just stay inside and either read something spooky or binge watch true crime documentaries. And lately I've been completely hooked on American Monster on Philo. And let me just say, this show is unsettling, and the best way. So like I said, when it starts getting dark like this so soon, I fall right into my streaming season routine. The lights are down low, I have a blanket on, and something genuinely creepy is on in the background. And American Monster checks every box. It uses real home videos and interviews to show these seemingly normal people, smiling, laughing, and acting completely harmless, until you learn what they are really capable of. And season 1, episode 2, Appalachian Horror Film, that episode literally gave me chills. Not only does it use real home footage from this man's so-called amateur horror film, but you can literally watch the shift, the exact moment where things stop feeling like acting and start feeling like something much darker. It's unsettling because it's real. If you want something to get fully obsessed with during these long creepy nights, start streaming on Philo. You can watch American Monster and countless other movies and documentaries just like this. It's affordable, it's easy to use, and honestly, it's the perfect place to lose a few hours to something truly disturbing. What better way to spend the streaming season than with Philo? Go dive in and you'll see
Why is this not all over the UK news? And why is he running like that? This whole clip feels so eerie. He's just vanished into thin air in Loughborough. Aryan Sharma is a 20-year-old uni student currently living in Loughborough. And on a Friday night at the end of November, he left his student halls in Woodgate supposedly for a normal night out. But weirdly, he was spotted on CCTV running through the town centre in a really weird way. He was last seen on security cameras on Meadow Lane on the outskirts of Loughborough, but he never made it home that evening. Suddenly stopped all of his communication with his family and friends, which was totally out of character. Usually he would always be speaking to his family every single day. So on the Saturday, when they couldn't get in contact with him, they were like, we actually need to report this to the police now. So police decided to go and do a welfare check at his accommodation just to see what was going on, whether he was actually there or not. They were like, no, he's definitely not home. And the really weird part of this all is his wallet and all of his other belongings were there. So it's not like he just up and left of his own accord. And I don't know about you guys, but just the way he's like running really strangely and like looking over his shoulder constantly, it makes me feel like something's really off. It's almost like he's running away from someone. Police are obviously desperate to piece the pieces of the puzzle together and find this guy once and for all. They need to try and work out what the hell happened to him after he was last seen on camera, because how could somebody possibly just vanish into thin air? Locals and his family are obviously extremely worried about him. Loads of people actually online have been saying how dark and dangerous the route is back home from where he was. But like, if he's fallen or got lost or had an accident of some sort, surely he would have been found by now.